Hello and welcome to another comedian's interview for my blog Arichcomiclife. My name is Richard Gill and my blog describes my experiences of watching over 800 comedians and counting over the last 46 years. My guest today is the great comedian Mr. Carl Donnelly. Yes! Hello, mate!
How you doing? All right.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. It's a testament to your experience as an audience member that you can lead a round of applause on your own in your house.
Well, it's
so much practice.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for doing this.
No worries.
And it's going to be about 45 minutes to an hour, and it's going to be all about your comedy career.
Oh my God. Cool.
So we're going to go right back to the start. And can you tell me, please, how did you become a comedian in the first place? I'd never planned to be it. I wasn't somebody who started, I wasn't one of these people that grew up watching it and thought, I want to do that one day. It was a total sort of happy accident where I had never been to live comedy before. I was about 21, maybe. Right. And I'd seen I'd grow up watching Dave Allen on the telly and Billy Connolly. Now, I knew what comedy was, but it was a very abstract thing that was just on the telly. And it wasn't until I was about 20 or 21, and my ex, she became my wife, but now my ex-wife, we just started seeing each other, and she was a big comedy fan, and she'd been to like the Edinburgh Fringe and all that business, and I didn't know what the Edinburgh Fringe was. And then she took me to a comedy show, and I just loved it. It was that thing. I walked in having no idea what was going to happen, and I just watched this amazing live thing where it felt so exhilarating. I'd never seen live entertainment where it genuinely felt like, you were just, the person was talking almost directly to you. Yeah. And I just fell in love with it. And within I'd say I started going to comedy almost weekly, became a real comedy fan and live comedy fan. And then, and I reckon it was probably about 6 months after that my girlfriend at the time started saying that she thought I should do it. She was like, I think you could do stand-up. And I didn't know why. And basically it's just, because I wasn't like, I don't think I'm the most confident person in general, in sort of social situations, but I think she just picked up on my sensibilities, and like, I'm always quite good at a well-timed comment, you know. Yeah. And she started recommending me do it, and it took about a year of her saying that and us going to watch comedy for me to even start thinking about it. And then she as a gift, she signed me up to a comedy workshop. Wow. Which was a few weeks at a place called the City Lit in central London. And yeah, I did that, and just doing that actually gave me the little kick to go, oh, actually, I do want to try this. And I did a 5-minute open spot at the end of it. And I loved it so much. Terrifying, but I loved it. And that was the start of the rest of my open spot. What year was this?
So she signed me up to the workshop at the end of 2003. Right. But I then got ill. I had quite serious stomach problems at the time. Oh, dear. So I ended up sort of having a bit of a break. So it would have been, I remember doing like a couple of open spots in 2004. Yeah. And then it was 2005 when I started properly gigging, like really doing the open mic circuit.
Right. My first ever comedy show was Les Dawson in 1977 at Scarborough.
Wow.
I was 7 and I was hooked. And in the same the year later we saw Tommy Cooper.
Whoa.
And then it just went on and on and on and on into the 80s, and so Rick Mayall and Frank Skinner and French and Saunders and all the rest of it. My first ever trip to the Comedy Store in London was 1988, and that was Steve Gribbin, Linda Smith, Hattie Hayridge, and top of the bill was Charles Fleischer, who went on to
he went on to. He was never heard of again because he went to Hollywood to voice Roger Rabbit, and so he didn't need to work again.
Oh my
But
God.
he was amazing. He was this like mad lunatic on stage, running a bit like Robin Williams.
Yeah, but one thing I remember about that first gig it was at the Banana Cabaret where I first went to see comedy, and I remember, I don't actually remember the other acts apart from Addy van der Borg. I remember Addy Borg was on, and it was so, because he's very clownish, and I'd never seen anyone like him on telly. He wasn't. Yeah. This would have been the very early start of the 2000s essentially. So on telly at the time, you would maybe have seen Jack D or people like. Everyone was quite sort of you would have had the end of the 90s, which was all Skinner and Baddiel.
Yeah, brilliant.
Everyone was quite blokey. So to see someone like Addy, I just walked in and suddenly this guy's on stage being silly and like clowning, and I remember just thinking, this is so amazing. I've told Addy this since, that like he's basically, I think, the reason I do stand-up comedy. I think he was the spark that made me go, oh shit, you can do this, can you? You can actually just be silly and dumb, and you don't have to write, you don't have to come up and be quite acerbic and deadpan, and like and you can actually just be an idiot. And I loved it.
So, is he like a mentor to you, or was he just the first person you saw and thought, I could do this?
No, he wasn't. Yeah, he just was that. He was the first person I saw that made me realise that stand-up wasn't just what you saw on telly.
Yeah,
it was somebody you could. Yeah, there was so many other types of stand-up. I genuinely I'd only ever seen guys in suits essentially, or you'd see guys. In the late 90s, everyone would be like sort of dressed quite down. It'd either be in a suit or it'd be a bloke in a baggy t-shirt sort of moaning.
Yeah.
So like to see somebody like Addy, who clearly was a clown, but doing stand-up as a clown, it was such a moment of like, oh right, it must be like, when you hear stories where people saw the Sex Pistols, like, and it just changed their view of music. Addy, to me, is the guy that made me change my entire view of what stand-up comedy was.
That's fantastic.
And I think that was the spark that made me get really excited about it and watch loads of it. And and then it was that period of time when there was loads of comics that were just like starting out in the UK.
Yeah.
That like this was before I started, but I saw people like Tony Law, like when he was at his maddest, So
still is.
Yeah, but it was like really exciting to sort of see all these people who were doing slightly more surreal things. Yeah. And I went to the Edinburgh Fringe. Me and my ex went to the Edinburgh Fringe, and I showed up to the Edinburgh Fringe not knowing what it was, and it was like being in a fairground for a week.
Incredible, yeah.
Oh,
we're going to move on to that later. So you're at the City Lit, and you've done your comedy course. Did you then do a lot of 5-minute gigs with friends in pubs? Is that how you got your grounding? Sort of,
yeah. So I remember it finished at the very end of 2003, when I'd had these health problems, and I'd still had quite a busy job. So 2004, I'd got the bug for it. I'd worked out that I wanted to try it, but I just didn't really have the time or the impetus to really kick on and do it. So I remember doing a handful of gigs. But in 2005, I'll tell you what it was. It was the end of 2004. I think I did what was it called? The Amused Moose competition. The Amused Moose something or other. And I was chatting to a comedian called Anna Crilly, who also acts.
Yeah.
And we'd met, I think, very early in 2004 at an open spot. It was one of my first open spots. And at the end of 2004, we saw each other again at the Amused Moose. And she thought, it might have even been the start of 2005. She said, have you been doing loads of gigs? And I said, yeah, I've been doing a few. And I think I'd done about 8 gigs in a year. And I said to her, like, how many have you done? And she'd done 100 open spots that year.
Wow.
And it made me go, I'm doing it wrong. I need to actually commit to it and start gigging.
Yeah.
So 2005, I went absolutely bananas and totally committed everything to it. I was gigging 3 or 4 times a week in London, all open spot gigs. I started entering the competitions. I went to Edinburgh that year and did loads of open spots. I did about 50 open spots in a week in Edinburgh. and basically by the end of 2005, I started to really find my feet, and I was getting decent. And then it was early 2006. I won a thing called the Laughing Horse New Act of the Year.
Yeah.
Because I'd basically committed in 2005 to gigging loads. So yeah, by the time that came around in 2006, I was like, I'd probably done at that point 150 gigs because I'd just gone crazy in 2005.
And I think obviously it's all experience, isn't it? The more you do, the better you become. Yeah,
and just those gigs, that was a time when loads of people were starting to try out comedy, and there was a real boom. The open mic circuit boomed in that mid 2000s and TV comedy started then. When I say TV comedy, I mean the modern age of TV comedy. A sort of what was it called, like Live at the Apollo and things were just on the horizon. And like I think Mock the Week started around the mid 2000s. So there was, for the first time in a generation, there was suddenly comedy on telly, so loads of people were like, I want to be a comedian. So that the circuit just blew up. So there was suddenly loads of open spots. A lot of the gigs were rubbish, but they taught you what you're doing.
Yeah, very much so. What do you like to talk about on stage? Do you have any themes, or do you have any set pieces that you do? Or
I'd say I lean more towards stories than I definitely lean towards stories and like jokes. I'm not a here's a setup, here's a punchline comedian. It's more stories, but I tend to sort of sneak like observations in them. So it's always like if I make an observation about something, it's normally I'll put it in a little story to communicate it better. So that's what I've always sort of done, stories. So, and because I do stories, I tend to keep it as true to life as possible. So I've always mined my life, my family, travel, whatever's going on that year. I'll always, as the year goes on, I'll amass a bunch of different things that have happened, and
brilliant.
It makes it easier. I'm not really a writer, I'm not somebody who can. Imagine I'm like doing a new show in Edinburgh or some festival, like where I'm at now. I'm in Melbourne at the minute. Me and my wife came down to Australia, sort of, to get away from the UK because we've got a little baby, and she's from here and she wanted to sort of come home for a while it was all shite in the UK. So we came here, and it just happened to coincide with the Melbourne Comedy Festival. So they asked if I wanted to do a show. And I wrote a new show in the space of like a month or two to do here. And it was just, it was that thing of, I find I don't sit down and go, right, what am I going to write about? And then write an hour of jokes. I tend to go, right, what's happened to me in the last year? I've had a baby. We've been in lockdowns on and off. We've travelled over here. And it basically, suddenly I just realised I've got a bunch of stories that if I can make them funny, I've got a show.
You said earlier on about competitions. In 2007, you won the Chortle Award Best Newcomer Comedian and the Leicester Mercury New Comedian, as well as picking up the Chortle Best Comedian in 2017. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Describe these experiences, please, and what do you think about competitions generally, comedy competitions?
I think competitions they're good when you're new. Because for not just for you as a comedian, but for the industry, in the sense of there is thousands and thousands of people starting out trying to do comedy every year. And I don't, they're not a perfect science, a competition. I'm not saying that the finalists of each competition are going to be the best 8 comedians of that generation, you know what I mean? But I do think there is a sort of, they'll roughly, the people that tend to get to the finals of this one or this one or this one tend to be like of the good crop of the new people coming through. So, when I won Laughing Horse, that was the first time I'd ever suddenly talked to like bookers who were booking better rooms and sort of the odd agent. And 2007, when I won Leicester Mercury and Chortle Best Newcomer, again it suddenly was like, oh right, now a few people started sniffing around agent wise. So I think it was, when was it? I think it was 2007. At the end of 2007, I'd signed with an agent, and that was, it would have been off the back of those things.
Yeah.
And then and as it goes on, I think once you get out of new act territory, I started to really just focus more on what I was doing and stop really caring much about awards and all that. Even though I've been nominated for a few since, and I've won. I think I've probably only won one out of all the ones I've been nominated for in the last decade. But they're nice to be acknowledged. But I genuinely, and I think people probably think it's a lie when somebody goes, "I don't really care about awards," but I do think I'm not. I've always felt not that normal compared to some comedians. Like, I don't read reviews.
Right.
I don't do any of that. I'm very sort of. I love being a comedian in the sense of when I'm on stage, but off stage, it's not something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. I don't read about myself. I don't. Like awards and things aren't the biggest thing on my mind. No. Even when I do Edinburgh, like when I've done. I've been nominated in Edinburgh for the Comedy Award, and to some people that would be the biggest thing it could ever happen to you. And actually, it was lovely, but it wasn't. I wasn't like desperate to get nominated or desperate to win it. Partly, I think, because I didn't know what Edinburgh was when I started. I think because I started out so naive and didn't know anything about comedy, that's probably a good thing, because it doesn't mean I've got this childhood of like, one day I'll win the Edinburgh Comedy Award or something like that. To me, that's all just new things I learnt about, so they're not actually that important.
It's interesting because when I first thought about doing this blog, I went on a day's writing course, and I was with a load of other people who wanted to be reviewers, and the woman came to me and she said, "We've forgotten about you." She said, "Tell me about you." I said, "Well, you invited me through a comment in my blog." And I said, "I'd just like to say I'm not a reviewer, I'm not a diarist, I'm not a reporter, I'm not a critique. I'm a member of the audience out to have fun. So my blog is extremely positive, and I regard it as an enthuse for all the heroes that go out and actually have a go and do it." And I said, if I can sit in the audience and support them as best I can, all well and good. And she went, "Oh yes, we like you," moved on and never bothered me again.
So, it's a funny one, the reviewers. Like, I don't know if you've talked about reviewers or reviews to many comedians, but it's a real interesting topic, I find. Like, there's a lot of opinions a lot of comedians got very strong opinions on them. Like, I genuinely don't. I'm not. I think because I don't read them, and when I say I don't read them, I don't mean I don't just read mine. I don't read any comedy reviews. I'm not like, I don't read other people's for hoping like, I hope they get a bad review, or I don't get jealous if somebody gets a good one. I just don't. It's almost like I don't have any interest in comedy reviews because they're sort of, I don't know if I've always thought they're not for us. If you're a comedian, you do it. Do you know what I mean? I just do comedy. I don't really. Think you've suddenly separated. And actually reviewers, I don't have any issue with reviewers. I actually think reviewers have a purpose, and they're just doing it because they want to watch and discuss comedy.
Yes, of course.
But ultimately, I think a reviewer is an audience member who sort of has elected themselves to be like, I'll report back. I'll go and watch it and report back to the people that haven't seen it yet. So that's fine to me. But I don't know if they're going to do that and report back. I don't really think I should read it. That feels like that's not for me to hear. I should just ignore it and let them report back to the others and tell them what they thought.
My answer to that is, as soon as anything becomes work, I go off it.
Well, I think that's part of my.
You're out to have a good time, and you should embrace it.
That's what I've always thought with my stand-up in particular. I've gone really out of my way to always treat it as not a hobby, but as more like I'm living the dream, essentially. I'm basically not. I don't have a job. I've managed to find a way of doing something I really love and not working. So I've never really thought about it as a career or
So that's why I think I've not got the investment in reviews and awards that some comedians have, because to them, a great review and a award is sort of a marker of their career, whereas for me, it's like they've happened, but because I don't think of it as a career, for me, it's always just a rolling ball of my next gig.
Yeah. With me, it's much more of a passion. I think everybody in life needs something else other than the routine of work or whatever you do in your daily life, and then if you've got something else on top of that. And I found this late in life. I had a great long list, a giant spreadsheet of all these acts that I'd seen, and I thought to myself, why am I doing this? And then I thought, I've got an idea here. And the blog started, and the rest is history. To date, what has been your best and worst gig? If
best
you have
and
any,
worst
I can't
gig.
believe you have any bad gigs.
Oh mate, I've had bad gigs. I genuinely have had bad gigs. But I don't think I've had loads. I'm quite lucky, I think, in that. Because my style makes it slightly harder to have bad gigs. I'm very conversational. I'm not somebody who goes out and does dark, edgy stuff that might offend people. Like I think, you know, I've got that sort of, the margin of error for my stand-up is probably bigger than a lot of people's. But I've still had bad gigs. I'm trying to think the worst gig I've ever had. The worst gig I ever had would have been, it was a Christmas gig for Jongleurs. Probably 2009.
Right.
So, you know, I was still relatively new, but I was professional. I'd gone full time, so it was my job essentially. And I started. It was my first year of doing Christmas gigs. I didn't know much about Christmas gigs, but it was when you get paid good money to perform to Christmas parties. We're all having a 3-course meal, and they're out on like there's big work dues and stuff. And I just was not experienced enough for it. And I did one at Jongleurs Covent Garden, which was notoriously a tricky gig.
Yeah.
And I just absolutely died. And they wouldn't even look at the stage. They were all talking when I got on stage. The compere, I can't remember who it was, hadn't really settled them and got them looking. So I just went on, and they were just already not really paying attention. And I started trying to get them galvanised. And it just wasn't happening. And the more I got sort of like, come on, guys, tried to cajole them to watch me, the more I lost the people that were watching because it looked desperate. And I was just I was like treading water. And everyone started talking. Then some people started booing. So I went on the attack. And then about 10 minutes into my 20-minute set, I was basically just getting booed off. So I wished them happy Christmas and walked off.
But again,
it was brutal.
I think you have to go through these difficult ones to become a better comedian.
Oh yeah. That taught me the most about those sorts of gigs than anything else I could have done, really.
Yeah.
Because what was amazing as well, what it taught me, I walked off stage thinking this gig is unplayable. Like there's not a comedian on earth who could walk on there and have a good gig because they're not listening. And then Hal Cruttenden was on after me. And Hal, Hal had already been. He's brilliant. Hal's such a experience. He's been around probably a decade longer than me. Or probably maybe 6 or 7 years longer than me. And he went on, and he totally got their attention. He really just worked for it early doors in his set.
Yeah.
He didn't look desperate. He just sort of steamrolled them into looking at him. And then he just had an absolute belter of a gig, and I was watching it, and no part of me was not jealous. No part of me was like, oh, fuck, shit, he had a great gig and I died. I just knew I was watching somebody who knew how to do it better than me for that sort of gig. He'd done loads of them before. He was experienced. He knew what he had to do. And I then was, I've just got to learn. I've just got to get more experience and learn how to cope in those sort of situations.
With your best gig, I'm thinking of, was there ever a time where you thought, I can do this and I can do this well on stage and the audience are mine and it's going really well? There must have been a time in your career where you thought, I'm all right at this is going to be a full-time job.
Yeah, I think early doors I had that. I reckon... you learn very quickly. I don't know what it's like now. I can't speak for open spots now, but you learn when you're an open spot. When I was doing it, that very quickly you sort of find yourself in a little group of the better ones. You know what I mean? It's not a clique, but you just find yourself. You'll do an open spot, and because you're decent, you'll get booked for another one and another one there, and then you'll get a bit of a longer spot. And what happens is you find yourself getting in a slightly smaller group as they're sort of filtering off the ones that aren't going to move forward. So, by probably, like that Laughing Horse win in 2006, that's from there through the rest of 2006, I suddenly started noticing my hit rate was better on stage. I started writing more because I had to step up from 5 minutes to 10 minute sets and longer. I started getting booked for like my first 20s and stuff. So by the end of 2006, I'd had a bit of a rapid rate of, I'd gone from 5 minute open spots at the start of the year to getting booked at some clubs to do 20 minutes by the end of the year. And then it was 2007, I remember getting booked for like my first proper clubs. Like, I think I remember getting booked for like a glee club, which was it was so out of my capabilities at that point, really. Right. So when I started just getting asked to do those clubs, I suddenly was like, I think I'm starting to work out how to do this, and work out, what I'm about. And then B, it's being reflected by bookings. So that was when I first realised I think I'm all right. But that being said, like I'm really, I'm very. I never look back at like thinking. I always now look back at each period of my stand-up career in sort of blocks, and I always think, nah, I wasn't actually that good then. I was, I was okay in that crop, but I always think. If you had to ask me, like, I wouldn't do a routine of mine now. I think I've got probably one routine from about 2013 that I reckon would be one that might, if I had to dust it off, I'd be happy to do that now. But other than that, I don't think I wouldn't dip into anything older than about 3 or 4 years, because I don't actually think they're very good in hindsight.
Yeah. I've seen you live many times, and I think you're a really, really great comedian. You've made me laugh so much over the years. One of the best aspects to your act, I think, is the way that you interact with an audience. You just walk on and you make it look so easy. Do you cope? Do you have any nerves before you go on stage, and how do you cope with them? Because you seem very, very confident when you're on stage chatting to the audience.
Yeah, I am. Well, that's sort of that thing of, that calmness on stage that came very naturally, and I don't really know why. Because I like, before my early gigs, I was terrified. I'd never done any public speaking, never done any acting or drama at school. I was a scared little boy. I never did. I didn't want to read out in class or anything. But that in them early gigs, I sort of weirdly, when I went on stage, I suddenly relaxed, and I was like, oh, I think I can chat to these people. I managed to sort of
something, isn't there? There, yeah.
Any time a joke wasn't flying, I sort of realised I could always fall back on conversing with the crowd.
Yeah.
And so actually, I became very comfortable on stage very quickly. But I do get nervous before bigger gigs, like, if it's, do you know when I get the most nervous is when something's recorded, like a gig that is live but recorded for, if it's television or if it's anything, like, like I did, when I did Mock the Week a couple of times, I found that so nerve-wracking, because I was like, the pressure is on because the stakes are higher. This isn't what I love about live gigs that aren't recorded is they are genuinely one-offs. They'll never be repeated. Even if you have, like, obviously you might have 4 acts, you could put those 4 acts in a different gig, and obviously some of the material is going to be the same, but the audience is different, so the gig itself is totally different. There's so many different ingredients. So that's what I love about it. I always feel very comfortable knowing that this is a one-off, that once we're done, that will never happen again. We've just managed to do something that is genuinely a one-off. So I feel very comfortable in that environment. The moment there's a camera involved, and it might, and it's going to be watched by other people who weren't at our thing, I suddenly go like, oh God, now what if it's rubbish?
Yeah.
So that makes me scared.
You start analysing yourself, and you need
totally
to just do it. Yeah.
I did a gig here in Melbourne that I've done twice before. They've got at a comedy festival, at the start of the comedy festival, they've got a big show called the Gala. It's called the Oxfam Gala.
Yeah.
And it's basically in this massive theatre called the Palais. That's one of the most beautiful theatres you'd ever see. It holds 3,000 people, and it's a televised show. So you do it, they film it, it goes out like the week after. And I've even having done it before, you never, and I talked to other comedians about it, you're never ever prepared. Like I spent the whole day feeling really relaxed. I'd worked out my set, but the moment I had makeup done and I was backstage, like it was about 3 minutes before showtime, I just found myself going, what are you doing with your life?
Right.
Like how could you possibly think this is a good idea? And I just go, are you going to like a blind panic? But then the moment I walk to the front of the stage and say hello, I'm fine. They go away.
Yeah. It's interesting because other than the blog, the most creative thing I ever did, I wrote a play which I originally wrote for the Edinburgh Fringe. But I've never taken it there. I should do, but we raised a lot of money for Comic Relief. We did 3 shows, myself and my friend, and another friend directed it, and it was called The Applicant, and well, it is called The Applicant, and it's about me. It's basically me coming to London from Carlisle, my home city, and trying to get a job. I've got a very successful girlfriend who's got a job, and I can't get a job. So it's the first scene is the waiting room, and then the interview, and that's done like 6 times, and it gradually builds up. He runs out, and he's very nervous on his first interview, and he sees the audience, and he starts chatting to them, and that's the monologue set in the scene for the story.
Yeah.
So of course we rehearsed this for 10 weeks. And I had these great monologues that I didn't realise I'd written, and I ran out on the opening night and I forgot the lines.
Yeah, of course. It's the thing. That's what nerves do to you. I've watched open spots.
Yeah.
Who, like, I couldn't believe were so confident backstage.
Yeah.
Like, I remember like once hosting a gig at the Glasgow Stand, which is an amazing club, and I was hosting their Red Raw night. It's like a new act night, so it's 15 5-minute open spots, and I was hosting. And I had the list of acts, so I went into the dressing room. I was introducing myself, like, "How you doing, everyone? Right, here's the list." I went, "Who's so and so and so and so," and I couldn't find the person who was on first. And then I looked, and there was one guy who'd not introduced himself. Everyone else was coming up all nervously and going, "Hi, I'm John," whatever. And this one guy was sitting on a sofa with his hands behind his head, like looking like you'd think he'd been doing comedy for 25 years. I went over to him. I went, "Mate," "Oh, you must be," and I said the name. It was number 1. And he went, yeah. I went, "Oh, you know I'm first?" He was like, yeah, man, that's fine. And I was like, and I said to him, like, "How, like, have you been doing it a while? Because you seem very calm." Sorry. And he said, "Oh, it's my first gig." And I was like, "Oh my God."
No.
In my head, I was like, this guy's so confident. But he was like, "Yeah, I'm doing an acting degree." And he was just talking about it like he was going to be so great. And he went on stage first, and like, it's an amazing club. So it was so, like, the first 10 minutes of hosting was so easy and fun. I brought him on to a great atmosphere. He should have been. If he had a decent 5 minutes, he would have knocked it out of the park. But he just did his first gig, and it just got hardly anything. It wasn't a very good joke.
Mate.
So his first joke, and then his next joke, same thing. Just he said it thinking this is a great joke, and it just didn't get anything. And you watched him basically fall apart inside because he was so overconfident, thinking it was going to be great, that he hadn't even factored in it might not be funny. And then I watched, and then he started fumbling, he started forgetting bits, and he just went to pieces. And like, he did about 2 minutes in the end, and it's like, I was watching thinking, this is all your fault, mate. You've basically you've come in so confident here, and you've not factored in nerves, you've not factored in that it might not go how you expected. And it was like, nerves can totally derail you. Like, even like down the line when you're, on an Edinburgh preview, if you've done an Edinburgh preview and you've got an hour of notes on stage,
if it starts badly and you're 10 minutes in and it's not going, you're just, your head goes, you start sort of messing bits up. You'll never ever, you can never totally conquer nerves. So no matter how good you are or how long you've been doing it, they're always there in the background.
It reminds me of the old Ken Dodd story. I saw Ken Dodd many times. Of course, he was extraordinary live. He'd go for 5 hours. And remembering it all is extraordinary, And all
that's fascinating.
Yeah, it was amazing. But he had the old story of he was describing how folk laugh, and it starts at the bottom and it works your way up through your mouth, and all these theories of laughing. And he did a Freud theory on it, and he said. And he explained it all, and he said, mind you, ladies and gentlemen, Freud didn't play the Glasgow Empire on a Friday night, so even he must get nervy,
that was fate. The Glasgow Empire is like, I've heard so many funny apocryphal stories about it. Isn't it? Des O'Connor used to have a great one about like, he played it when he was like a hot young thing of British comedy. He'd smashed every gig in the country, gets to Glasgow Empire, gets booed off within a couple of minutes, says, I'm never playing that room again. About 10 years later, he's a TV star, everything. He's famous. They say, can you come back and play it? You headline the show. And he's like, I said I'd never play it again. He's like, come on, you're a star now. They'll love you. And he went back and they booed him off again. Which I think is so funny. And they did it on purpose. They were like, right, let's get him again. I love it.
There's another one. We're moving on to Edinburgh next, but there's another story, which is one of my favourites, where this poor comedian, who will remain nameless, he was playing a little tiny room. And I was there with my friend who was reviewing the show, and there was us two, and there was a Scotsman in the front row, drunk Scotsman in the front row, and the comedian walked on full of enthusiasm. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and then looked and saw just the three. He said, I'm not going to bother tonight because there's only 3 of you here. I will buy you a drink for coming along. Thank you very much. And the bloke in the front row went, no, I've paid my £6, I want the hour. And he had 4 minutes.
That's brutal.
So he did. Anyway, let's move on to Edinburgh. I'm very fortunate to be able to go to Edinburgh every year, and I've been going there since 2005. I go there for my holiday. I spend a week there, and I see about 50 shows in a week. I need holiday by the time I come back. But you're always on the list to go. I always see you in some sort of show when I'm there. Can you tell me what was your first Edinburgh Festival was like, please?
The first time I ever went to it was, I think it was 2004. I think me and my ex went up for like a holiday, so we just went to watch shows. That was where I remember seeing Tony Law's show. It was the funniest hour I've ever. To this day, it would be up in my top shows I've ever seen at Edinburgh. Right. And I saw some great shows. But in 2005 was when I went up as an open spot, did a few gigs. 2006 was when I first did it, like in the sense of me, Chris Martin, and Sean James did a 3-hander called The Good, the Bad, and the Cuddly, and we did 2 weeks on the free. We did 2 weeks on the Free Fringe, and it was like, it was so amazing doing just our own thing where we were all doing. That was where we basically learned to do your 20-minute sets, because we basically had suddenly could do 20 minutes each. Sean hosted and me and Chris split, like we'd change around each day who goes on first, who goes on second. And by the end of the 2 weeks, we were so much better than we, were before it. So that was like that. But it was a 2-week run. My first full run was 2007 when I did a thing called the Comedy Zone for Avalon. So it was an Avalon comedy showcase. That was, it was quite prestigious, and like people like Stuart Lee had done it over the years. Like if you look at the lineup of people that did it over the years, it's mad. And it sadly doesn't run anymore. It stopped a few years ago. But it was a real thing. To be asked to do that was a real stamp of approval that, like, right, you're one of the top open spots in the country. So that, and it was like, it was all, you know, you were in an amazing room in the cabaret bar at the Pleasance, 9:45 every night. It was great. And I did it with Joe Wilkinson,
brilliant,
Barry Dodds and John Robbins, and it was just fantastic. 4-man crew of like, everyone was really different. Like John Robbins was mainly hosting, Joe Wilkinson was on second, Barry Dodds was on first, I was last, and like Barry was a ball of energy, a ball of nervous energy every day. Like he was really sort of in his head. Like me and Robbins were a bit more like just getting a bit pissed and having a laugh. We felt like we were sort of just living the dream. Joe was like constantly just like, this is shit. I don't like, moaning about having to do the gig.
Still does.
Oh man, Joe Wilkinson is. Me and Joe started out around the same time. I actually was at Joe's first ever gig. It was before I did stand up.
Wow!
So it was when I was going to watch loads of comedy in that period before I wanted to do it. I went to and my ex said we should go and watch some new comedians, because if you are thinking about doing it, you should actually see the newbies and see what it's like to do an open spot gig. And I went to the Banana at the Bedford in Balham. Used to have a Tuesday new act night. And I went down, and Joe Wilkinson was on doing his first ever gig.
Wow.
He was smoking on stage, which shows what, you know, it was 2003 probably. And he was there. He went on just with a fag, and he had loads of like, he was just doing these weird jokes and like, but you could tell he was a funny man.
He holds the record to this day for one of the best live sketches involving me. I was sitting on the front row at Always Be Comedy, and he was performing. He was doing MASH with Diane Morgan.
Yes,
And he's a lovely bloke. He's supported my blog, and he's a wonderful comedian. She came on and came up to me and gave me the finger. Didn't say anything. She just gave me the finger in front of my face, and nothing happened for about 3 minutes. She just gave me the finger, and then he tapped her on the shoulder and he said, I knew you should have got an invisibility cloak. And
they were great. Two episodes of MASH
just collapsed. It was wonderful.
They were really good sketch duo. I think a lot of people wouldn't have even, a lot of people now wouldn't realise those two had worked, like, done that back in the day. But like, Joe was amazing. But Joe has always had a real love-hate relationship with stand-up. You know, he's so funny, and he's done all these other great things. But he, like, from day one, when I started, we became matey and started gigging together and all that. And he just was, he loved a gig getting cancelled more than anyone I've ever known. Like, a last-minute cancellation would be, like, so you'd get to a gig and there wasn't many audience members, and like the promoter would go, it's probably not worth doing it. Joe would like celebrate like he'd scored a goal. Like football, he just loved a cancellation. He always had the best excuses as well. Like, there was a period where we used to refer to him as the Wolf, you know, the guy from Pulp Fiction who fixes stuff. Basically, if you wanted to get a good excuse to get out of a gig that you didn't want to do, you'd text the Wolf. And basically, Joe would just give you a great excuse. Right, so what you're going to do is you're going to tell him this has happened to your uncle. Like, it just give you an excuse that would get you out of the gig. Yeah. But it was great.
He's wonderful. I absolutely love him. He's great. So, we're in Edinburgh, and I've seen your solo shows. Relax, everyone. It's Carl Donnelly in 2009.
So that was my debut. That was my debut show.
Yeah, and so now that's what I call Carl Donnelly Volume 5 in 2013. I know there was Volume 6, but I couldn't get to that for some reason.
Yeah, I did 5 and 6.
They were both nominated for Edinburgh Comedy Awards. Congratulations.
One of them were. I don't think both of them were. It was one of them. It was the one in 2013. 2013 was the one that got nominated. I can't remember what
was nominated.
That was 2005. Yeah. So that was number 5.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was nice. But the other one, it was the newcomer one. That was the one I got.
The newcomer.
2009, I got a nomination for that, which was totally. I mean, both of them, to be honest, were totally out of the blue. Like the 2013, a little bit more like I was aware that it was going really well as a run.
Yeah.
But to like 2009, when I was doing my new show, like again, I knew I was probably, you know, just by the nature of how the circuit works, I knew I was probably in the top 10 debut shows, like, in terms of like people, out of all the people I knew doing their debut shows that year, me, John Robbins, people like that, I was like, you know, we're probably in the sort of running to be the better of the new lot. You know, if every year there's probably, you know, there's probably more now, but like back then there was probably 100 debut shows. There would be 50 of those would be just mad people who've just decided to go to Edinburgh and they've never done a gig before. Then there'd be 50 of people that are actually on the circuit and are new and starting to make headway, and you know, but there'd only really be 20 maybe who are, you know, been doing it a few years, getting to the point when they're going professional. Like, you know, once you actually start crunching the numbers, you realise if you're a good newer comic doing your debut show, you're normally actually only in about a group of 20, 25 that is probably the nomination list is going to come from those. So I mean, that was one though. I genuinely spent the month I was so giddy to be doing it, and like I was so excited when like my room seemed to be full every night, and I was just like, this is a dream debut run. So I had no idea who was going to get nominated, but I also, you know.
Congratulations, because the question from that, and you have touched on this, was where do you get your ideas for shows? I know you said that there isn't really a writing process that you do, but where do you get your ideas from to do an hour-long show as opposed to a 20-minute routine?
I think I tend to start with the routines rather than the show idea. Like I tend to, you know, because you have to register the show in February for August. You know, it's never going to be the exact show you think of in February unless you are planning a big themed, right, this is a thing. But like for me, I tend to, in January, just look at all the stuff I've written since like September and the bits that I'm doing, and there's normally some theme, you know what I mean? It's normally, the theme tends to be what's going on in your life that year.
Yeah.
So I tend to I look at it and go, right, this story about that feels like the show should probably follow that sort of subject matter. That tends to be it, unless there's been years when something else is going on that I've thought I've got to talk about this. Like, so there's one in 2013 where I got nominated. That was the year that me and my ex-wife broke up, and like 2012 was, I hated my run in 2012. Like it was the only year where I did a show that, looking back, I was like, I'm not happy with that at all. There was a couple of routines that were quite funny, but on the whole, I don't think I was in the right headspace, because because me and my ex, you know, we were just going through a bad time. So I think I showed up to Edinburgh not in a funny mood. And then by 2013 we'd broken up, but what had happened was I'd registered a show 2013. It was like, this is what the show's about. It's about blah, blah, blah. And then we broke up, I think it was about 6 weeks before Edinburgh. So the show that was registered, sort of, I'd written and I'd previewed it. So it was 6 weeks out of Edinburgh. I'd had a show that was getting ready, and everything fell apart. And I found myself living back at my parents', and I showed up to Edinburgh just sort of in a bit of a messy state. And the show ended up, as the month went on, reflecting my life falling apart. So I knew it was probably quite a good show to watch, because I think audiences really could tell that I was going through some tough stuff. So, but I was also desperately trying to make it funny, and parts of the show fell up, like I'd sort of almost let them into like what was going on in the background, and so I think it was probably a very exciting show to watch, because you could see that I was a bit on the edge. So I could just feel as the run was going on that people were really like coming in and enjoying just watching a man be genuinely honest about, like, this is what's going on right now. This is really in the moment, and like, so yeah, that was a real, like, that show sort of wrote itself.
That's interesting, because comedians obviously have lives as well, other than just doing comedy, you know, and when you go to a comedy show, you expect them to be full of enthusiasm. And all the rest of it, but if
you don't. People don't. audiences I don't think would ever factor in what's going on in comedians' lives, because I think comedians are very good at acting like everything's fine. But you know, the amount of comedians working, like, you know, there's obviously going to be people like, and it is very. I find going on stage tends to put your problems behind you a bit. Like you can sort of park them and be like, right, I'm on stage now, I can have fun. This is actually quite a break from the problems. But sometimes it is pretty brutal. Like I remember doing a show at the Comedy Store it would have been probably 6 years ago now, and I was walking into the Comedy Store, and you'll know the Comedy Store in Leicester Square. You go downstairs. And basically, you always lose phone reception as you walk down into the basement. And my phone rang just at the bottom of the stairs. If I was 2 meters on, it probably wouldn't have had reception. My phone rings, and it was my mum who told. Basically, she basically broke some really bad news to me about a cousin of mine had died. We were very close when we were young. You know, we hadn't really seen each other for a few years because she'd had a lot of issues, and it was just really horrible, sad news to hear. But the problem was, this was like 10 to 8, and I was opening, so I was on at like 10 past 8. So I just get told this harrowing, sad news, and I sort of say to my mum, "Well, thanks for letting me know, but you know, I'm at a gig. I'll give you a call later." And I walked into a dressing room, like, you know, like looking like I just found out somebody had died that was close to me.
Oh man!
Or everyone's having a laugh in a dressing room, and I'm just sitting there all sad. And then within 8 minutes of being in the dressing room, the show starts. Compares on, and 10 minutes later I'm on, and I just had to I realised it's too late to cancel. I had to just park it and just go and do it, and you know, I don't think it would have been a vintage set, but I don't think anyone would have realised what was going on. So it's a real extreme example of sometimes you just got to you know, flash on your teeth, give them a few grins and be like, hey, this is fine, even though inside you're like, no, it's not really, is it?
Well, as I say, you are very, very good at that, because whenever I've seen you, you're always very enthusiastic when you're on stage. I've seen you also host many a comedy night. Do you prefer comparing to performing a routine?
I don't know, you know. I think it depends on the night.
Yeah.
It depends on sometimes it depends on the club. There's certain clubs that I weirdly, in my head, associate them with me as I should be hosting this, not doing a set. I prefer it. I feel more comfortable. Like some of the Glee in Birmingham is a big 450 seat, like proper weekend comedy club.
Yeah.
And you know, it's great. Any spot you do is great, but for some reason I love hosting it. I just feel like it's a real fun gig, room to host. And there's other clubs like that as well, where I just like Up the Creek in Greenwich. I think Up the Creek in Greenwich is one of my favorite. Yeah, it's one of my favorite clubs on earth. And hosting it, I think, is so much fun. Like, I've hosted New Year's Eve there a couple of times, and it just feels like it's a compares room. But if you nail it in that room when you're hosting, it's your gig. Like the audience almost feel like it's you and them, and you're introducing some mates on to go like, oh, this person's really funny. So there's sometimes I definitely do prefer it, and it also doesn't feel like doing. You know, it feels like cheating. I always find that, you know, sometimes when I'm doing comparing, I'll do a whole night and not say a single thing that was pre-prepared, and you'll just come away thinking I've just been paid to genuinely have a laugh with a bunch of people.
But I think as well the compare has to keep it going, has to keep the atmosphere up. So when the acts come on, at least they've got a chance of keeping it going, you know. It's interesting. Let's move on. We're all living in very strange times. These lockdown has been awful for loads and loads of people. Have you done any online gigs, and how have you found them as opposed to live stand-up?
I have done. I ended up doing quite a few, and I learned to enjoy them. But you know, weirdly, I would say it's probably a time thing, but by the end of the year, like December, I did loads in December because there was a lot of like Christmas ones knocking around. We did almost like mini corporate gigs you'd do to like a company that are having a Zoom Christmas party. And actually, by then, I'd learned the sort of way to do them in a way that makes it feel fun, and you can banter with people individually on their little screens. And I genuinely was like, oh, this is fine, I'm happy with this. And I thought I really enjoyed them until I came out to Australia, where, you know, naturally they're doing much better with the coronavirus than the UK is, because A, their response, and B, they are an island on the other side of the world, so it's a bit easier to stop it getting in. So they're back to normal now. So I got here, and, you know, within a few weeks I started doing some gigs live, and the moment I did a live gig again, I was like, oh, obviously it's the most fun. Like Zoom gigs, I'd learnt to enjoy them, but having done a live gig again, and since doing live stuff, I've done a couple of Zoom gigs. And I've been, and now I'm like, oh no, they're actually nowhere near
That's fascinating,
the reality.
that you've had the best of both worlds, because I totally agree with you. I think online comedy is a super substitute, and if it hadn't have happened, I'd have gone, I don't know what I would have done. Because there is a market for it. But by God, I miss a live Saturday night comedy night. I love to go to somewhere like Headliners or the Soho Theatre or Cabaret or always
that feeling as well. Like,
it's fantastic.
I did a gig. Where was it? I did my show at the festival maybe a week and a bit ago. And afterwards, I went and did a spot at a late show. There's a really nice new club in Melbourne called the Comedy Republic. And afterwards, we went down to the bar, me and the other acts, and loads of people just descended on the bar, and there was the audience, there was loads of comics, and we're all sitting there having a beer after the show, and it genuinely felt like sort of, I don't know, it felt like an Edinburgh night after all the shows, and they were all in bars, and it was just, I was just so happy. I realised that not only do I miss the comedy aspect, but you forget how much, like, you know, for comedians, we are solo sportsmen essentially. You know, we travel around on our own, but we do mix when we're together at gigs, and that camaraderie, I really missed it. So I forgot how much I missed it until I experienced it.
Very much so. Who are your favourite comedians, past and present?
I mean, I think I mentioned Dave Allen earlier on. He's probably he would have been a very early influence on me, even though I don't really think I would have known it was stand-up, because, you know, he was just that Irish guy on the telly. But because my family's Irish, he was a real factor in the house.
Brilliant.
So there was him. I would say, you couldn't ignore Billy Connolly. I think growing up in the 80s and 90s, he was a constant. And then, like, you know, once I got into stand-up, it would have probably been people like Mitch Hedberg is one of my favourites.
Oh, superb.
He was one of my early inspirations. And then since then, every year I just see, you know, I love seeing people that I've never seen before, that, you know, and it's a funny thing, I don't really watch a lot of American comedy. So whenever you hear about these big Americans that everyone loves, I'm always about 10 years behind. I would have sung, you know, I've never watched a Dave Chappelle stand-up special, and most comics I know think he's probably currently the best in the world. So, like, I'm guaranteeing 5 years I'll watch one of his specials. I'll be like, but have you guys seen Dave Chappelle?
What have I missed?
I'm really bad for that. I did it with, I watched Peep Show for the first time 2 years ago.
Wow.
And I was raving about it, and everyone's like, yeah, we watched it at the time, mate. But like, in terms of, like, I watched like Maria Bamford, I think, is incredible.
Superb,
who else have I watched recently? I don't know. I mean, I suppose my favourite comic of the current, I suppose, we can't really say current because everything's stopped at a minute, but the best live comedian I've seen in the last sort of decade is Tommy Tiernan. Like, in terms of
choice,
like, he holds the record for me of the best gig I've ever seen a comedian have in terms of the atmosphere in the room. Like, I remember seeing. I would say it had more context to it. It was at the Kilkenny Festival. So it was the last show of the whole weekend. So there was a real buzz in the room. Tommy was headlining, and he just did this show that, you know, I've never felt an atmosphere like it in a comedy gig. Like, you know, it wasn't just laughter, it wasn't fun.
Yeah.
It was everything plus this sort of almost religious experience. Like, everyone came out of it almost like they were on drugs, like MDMA or something.
Fantastic.
But outside of that, the best gig I've ever seen anyone have was Michael McIntyre at the Comedy Store. The first time I ever did a 10-minute spot.
Wow.
I was really new. I got given a 10-minute spot because I won the Gong Show, and I'd never even heard of McIntyre. It was just before he blew up on television.
Yeah.
And he closed the show, and he just absolutely took the place apart.
Yeah.
It was so incredible to watch.
I saw Tommy Tiernan in the Gilded Balloon a few years back. He was incredible. And I saw McIntyre well before he was famous in a little tiny hut, something like the Pleasance Attic or something.
I remember I saw McIntyre do that show actually in the Pleasance.
It was amazing.
It was a great room.
It was amazing.
I think I saw that Tommy's one at the Gilded Balloon a few years ago. I think that's the one I'm thinking of.
Fantastic.
That was a great show. That was.
Yeah. The reason why I'm asking the question is obviously I've seen so many comedians. They've got so many memories for me, and it's interesting to find out from the comedians who they're like. I've got a section in my blog called "The Ones That Got Away," and I've written about 25 comedians that I've either passed on or I haven't been able to see. And one of them was Dave Allen. I nearly had a chance to go and see him in London. He did a tour in London just before he retired, and I wish I'd gone because I absolutely loved the show. Really.
Who else is on the list? Who else is who are the ones that got away?
Well, the reason why I like comedy is Morecambe and Wise. I missed them. I've seen everything else about them, plays. I've read all the books and everything. Bob Monkhouse is up there. Norman Wisdom. I've never seen Ross Noble. Amazing.
He's doing a show at this festival right now. Really. I might try and see it in the second half
as soon as I can.
Yeah.
There's loads of them. Richard Pryor I'd like to have seen.
I
saw Bill Hicks and I saw Steve Martin. Yeah, Bill Hicks was amazing. I saw him in Manchester. He was extraordinary, and
he was he's one that I loved when I was first starting stand up. I watched loads of it, but then I've not really gone back and watched it again to see how I feel about it now, because like
his book is brilliant. I
think I've read it. It's he was very good, wasn't he?
He was extraordinary. He walked on in a cloud of smoke, and it was midnight, and everybody just tuned in because they were all tired. He was late on. He tuned in. He went right, here we go, and he would not let up. And he was hilarious, but very, very truthful, and he could say what he wanted because he had the audience in the palm of his hand. All very intelligent stuff. Like me, before you were a comedian or now, do you go to a lot of comedy gigs as a member of the audience?
I do at festivals. The rest of the year, not so much, just because the rest of the year I'm gigging most of my nights. But I still, during festivals, I tend to nip out and see quite a lot. I see a lot of other stuff as well. Like if I'm at the Edinburgh Fringe, I'll go and see as many plays as I will see stand up and sketch, and like I'll try and see a load of different stuff. But I'm a good audience member as well. I'm not one of them comics that sits there and judges it and, you know, is sort of analysing it and not really laughing. I'll
the
laugh.
Best people, my friend.
I also, and I know it sounds, I'm actually I'll laugh at anything. Do you know, I'm a real, like, I'm not a snob when it comes to comedy, even though I do it. I will laugh at the most dumb observation. I'll laugh at something that's been done 100 times before by 100 comedians. Like, I don't really care if it's funny. I will laugh. I really. So
if I suddenly stop doing this, you could take over.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm very. I'm not. I don't know. I know a lot of comics I think get jaded by comedy and end up being a bit too more snobbish than they should be, but. You know, I really will watch a comic do stuff that some people might think is a bit old and tired.
Brilliant.
If it's funny and it's making me laugh, I'm absolutely happy with that.
If you're on a bill do you watch all the acts on the bill when you've done your spot, or?
I mean, that is it's very dependent on my, like, if I'm tired, I just need to go home. If I'm on with mates, I'll stay around to watch. There's a certain, I'll make more of an effort with people that I really want to stay and watch. But it's also, and a lot of times, if you're in London gigging, often you're doing a couple of gigs, and that is sort of that takes out your options. I find myself, I find myself in very rarely now getting the chance if I'm in London to do that.
Yeah. Just before we go, and I've so enjoyed talking to you. It's been an absolute joy.
Yeah, it's been lovely.
Is there anything else you'd like to say? Where can people find you on social media? You got any online gigs coming up, or podcasts, anything like that?
We've got. I mean, I'm on social media. I tend to treat it with a little bit of I sort of keep it slightly at arm's length in that I use Twitter very much for jokes. I don't ever engage with any opinions or politics. I keep it very light. Instagram, I just do dumb videos on Instagram of me making coffee and just doing voices. I try and genuinely use my social medias for being silly. So if people want to follow me, it's
social media, the blog.
Totally. I just find I'm so hesitant now to ever spend time on there, because every time I open it, it's just people arguing about stuff I don't have any interest in. So people can find me on there. And I do a podcast with Julian Dean called TVI, which is...
He's coming on here, Julian.
He's great. Julian's one of the funniest people I know.
Yeah.
He's a brilliant stand-up. He's a very great one-liner stand-up comedian, but he is off the cuff one of the funniest people I've ever known. He's also very... I've been to we had a big comics Christmas lunch a few years ago, and there was people on the at the table, that are pretty well known TV comedians, and people would think if you looked at the list of people at the thing, you'd think oh god, they must be the funniest. Julian's the funniest in that group, off the cuff, in conversation, out of the whole lot. He's so. But partly as well because he's got no filter. Whatever comes into Julian's head, he says it. So he's you just can't ever you never know what's going to come next. Oh man! So our podcast is me, a guest, and Julian, and it is normally just Julian interrupting the guest constantly with his little asides. It's really funny, but
brilliant.
If you listen, don't expect any genuine interviews. It's basically two people talking over a guest.
Well, it sounds fantastic, and certainly with your gigs, I'm looking forward very much to seeing you live again soon.
I can't wait. It's exciting to hopefully when we come back from Australia to the UK, things will be back open, so
it'll be better.
I'll be able to get straight back to it.
I look forward very much to seeing you soon, and I just want to thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely
no worries,
fantastic.
Man. It's been great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, my friend, and all the best to you.